everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're just going to do some box office reporting and analysis on Dune and its second box office weekend within US cinemas. Now, last week it debuted to just over 40.1 million at the opening box office, which I said was probably a decent opening considering the fact that it was open simultaneously with HBO Max. I also cited that the staggered release internationally, where it opened up in overseas markets well over 5 weeks prior to opening both US and UK, may have also hindered its performance in terms of limiting the all-around release hype and buzz in terms of the overall movie. So in its second weekend, Dune managed to hit 15.5 million. This represented overall a 62% drop at the box office. Now, this was to be expected, as I mentioned before, given the HBO Max release, which, as we all know, severely undercuts the theatrical performance because many people, of course, sit at home to watch it. And also, it leaves the film open to other accesses in terms of piracy, because now many people have a pristine HD copy of the film which they can view online. So we've seen this multiple times with Black Widows, and we've talked about this in previous videos as well. But I think also, despite the positive reaction from online critics and reviewers, the general audience had a very much more of a mixed reaction to this film. Many people felt that it was just too long. Most of the characters were very bland and they couldn't really connect with any of them. And some people have criticised the use of Hans Zimmer's music, and also the fact that they found Timothée Chalamet's performance as the lead character, Paul Atreides, as to be not very much of an interesting character in terms of overall charisma or personality. And I think this is something you really have to consider when really analysing the reactions. You really have to kind of take yourself outside of social media, because social media doesn't reflect reality. And we talked about this last week when we said that you'll have many Dune fans and enthusiasts, and also enthusiasts of science fiction, who wanted to see a return to more serious big budget science fiction movies coming out in the mainstream. So they were always having some sort of favoritism or bias when reviewing this film. So you really have to come outside of social media, because it doesn't reflect reality. So overall, so far, Dune has hit 69.4 million in the US, and worldwide now it stands at 292 million. So overall, in terms of its global tally, you're probably not looking any more than probably 350 million, I would say. It had a huge drop in its second weekend in China, and it's now open in most international markets now. So it's really not going to make any more money globally, to say. And the fact that it only made 15.5 million when there was relatively little competition. We had new releases, but none of them were really any big bangers in terms of opening releases to really trouble Dune. So, yeah, I think at this stage, we're just going to have to say it's not really been a massive box office success. As I mentioned before, it's got a hefty budget of around, 160 to 180 million. So it's barely going to break even at this point. So they've still announced a sequel. As I mentioned in previous videos, I'm still skeptical as to whether that sequel will happen. They've really now got to take consideration as to how much that sequel will cost. Because, yes, there's a lot of talk about Dune now, but if we are to say any potential sequel won't happen for the next 2 or 3 years, how much will that conversation about Dune maintain itself? It wasn't exactly what I would say a memorable movie. The way that it ended, such a abrupt and a very muted ending. It's not an ending that got many people talking, if you see what I'm saying here. So we just have to wait and see. I still think it will probably have a smaller scale budget and end up on HBO Max. I think it's very harsh to call it a flop considering all the other factors that I've talked about before, but I think overall it kind of is at this stage, just given the high budget and the expectations that they wanted this to be the next big massive franchise in the next style of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, and it's going to fall way short of that. So I just think lessons learned, and who knows, maybe if we get a Dune sequel and it comes out sometime in 2023, things will be a lot better in terms of the pandemic. More theatres will be open all over the place, particularly in America. And maybe if they go much more into the second portions of the book, where it involves much more of an expansive storyline, where Paul becomes the Messiah and he associates with the Fremen a lot more, and they take on the Hurricane and the Emperor. So in theory, Dune 2 should be much more of an action spectacular. Now, that may go against what the purists and the fans of the book want, but in theory, Dune 2 should be much more of an action-driven, exciting movie. So all of this is speculation because we don't know where we're at in terms of 2023. But overall, the first movie, I have to say, yes, just a box office misfire for Warner Brothers, and something for them to think about when adapting these much more of a cult niche science fiction IPs. Other news apart from the June opening weekend, primarily we had the No Time to Die, the latest James Bond installment, hitting a major milestone, grossing over 600 million worldwide. I think that's great for James Bond again. I think once again it shows how popular the franchise is on a global scale. It's not quite as popular in the US, but it tends to still do good numbers. I think at now, within its 4th week of release, it's grossed over 133 million in the US. So again, not bad given the pandemic. They probably wanted a bit more closer to the 200 million. Certainly that was Spectre gross when it was out in the US back in 2015. But I still think overall these are great numbers. But again, they're kind of discounted a bit because the film costs so much, anything from the region of 250 to 300 million. So again, this is, like Dune, something for them to really think about for the next James Bond installment. I've always wondered why they cost so much to make, because you don't really have a lot of CGI in these films. It's much more of a real world based story. So why are they even more expensive than the looks of the Marvel films, I will never understand. But still great numbers, and still proof that James Bond is still a very prominent franchise today. Now, Venom Let There Be Carnage has hit now over 400 million worldwide, so that's very good numbers. I still think it's due for release in China. I believe, I don't think it's opened yet there yet, so it's going to have very good numbers. I don't think it's going to hit quite the 850 plus million of the first film from 2018, but I still think these are very good numbers, and Sony will still have a lot of confidence in their intended Sonyverse with Spider-Man and various villains, because we've got the looks of Morbius coming out next year, and of course we've got Kraven the Hunter coming out shortly after that. So I think overall Sony were very pleased with the overall results in terms of Venom Let There Be Carnage. Now, there were some minor releases within the US this weekend with the likes of Antlers and also Last Night in Solo and My Hero Academia. All three didn't really make any much of an impression. They couldn't really capitalise on a Halloween weekend. I don't know why My Hero Academia was released that weekend. Very strange to me. It wasn't really going to do a lot of numbers anyway, but I don't know why you're releasing an anime adaptation amongst all these other releases at this time of the year. So very strange that they were releasing it at this point, but there you go. That's some strange decisions that they made overall. And so after all of those opening numbers, we then turn to next week, and all eyes will be focused on Marvel's Eternals. How well will it do? Will it indeed be the first real flop within the MCU? I've done a previous video covering that topic, and I will leave that link within the description. We've had all of the recent issues or controversies, if you like, regarding the supposed review bombing of the movie. If you don't know what that is, that's basically where people deliberately give it low scores because they have some sort of hatred or agenda against the film. So how well will Eternals do? Well, if we look at the previous Phase 4 MCU movies so far, Black Widow grossed 80 million with the Disney Plus streaming records. Shang-Chi opened at around, I think it was 75 million without the Disney Plus. So I think we're probably looking at anywhere from a 40 to 60 million opening weekend for Eternals. Now, that will be amongst the lowest, I believe, within the whole of the MCU. I think that's going way back to Phase 2 days with the looks of the Incredible Hulk, I believe, and the first Ant-Man as well. So I think that's what we're looking at here. Anything above will be a major plus for the movie. I've done a previous video where I reckon it'll probably gross around 300 million, which would probably represent a big flop for Marvel, given the current phase that we are in now. If that was a Phase 1, no problem for a new character, but of course we're now in Phase 4, and the huge dominant position of the MCU franchise, you'd expect much bigger numbers for literally any projects they release now in this current time, despite the pandemic as well. So we will wait and see overall how well it will do, and hopefully I will get to see the movie next week and give a review of myself. Now, I mean, I think as well they've released it to so many people now. If you go online, so many people have reviewed this movie. I kind of feel maybe that was a mistake to show it to so many people, given the fact that it's getting such a negative reaction. So I think when all the dust is settled, I think Marvel will look back on the Eternals and maybe do some sort of self-evaluation going ahead for any newer characters that they introduce within the cinematic universe. So much more food for thought, but of course we will see how well Eternals does in its first weekend when it releases worldwide. So those are my overall thoughts on the box office weekend, particularly looking at June's second weekend performance. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think it's really now a flop? Are you still skeptical as to whether we will see a second sequel? And if we do see a sequel, do you think they should scale it down in terms of the overall costs? Do you think it would be better served as a miniseries on HBO Max, or do you think there's still enough vitality for Dune to be a successful franchise going ahead if we do indeed get a part 2 and a part 3 in the future? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.